So we had an election, as I was saying earlier, November 8th, not that long ago, just a week ago. And we don't have the full picture yet at the federal level, although it looks like it's going to be split control. Looks like the House is going to be taken over by the Republicans, and the Senate will be retained by the Democrats, and the presidency, of course, wasn't up for election, so that's going to stay the way it is for the next 2 years. So that gives some idea of what's going to happen at the federal level, and my opinion is that probably much positive won't happen in terms of related to the environment and or climate change specifically. But there may be some chipping away and in terms of funding and some other means to try to slow things down. So don't be surprised if that happens. So we'll probably the national level and maybe us from the Susquehanna group level might be asking for support to, send letters or emails or make phone calls or whatever to try to push some things to happen. Now at state level, the news is different. Democrats are retaining control of both houses of legislature and the governorship. So there's a 2-year window where if we're asking for things to happen positively on the environment and for climate change, we should be able to reasonably expect those things to be acted on. And locally, it's a mixed picture. I'm not going to get into the local stuff. There were some disappointments. There were some positive news, some happy wins, but we don't have time to discuss all of that. If somebody wants to discuss something specific related to that, you're welcome to, but I'm not going to belabor those results. And we've got a legislative session coming up again at New York State. So we're gearing up for that too. So one thing I want to point out just as a backdrop, just so people are aware, New York State, at the state level, we collectively, because we're residents of New York State, we give $1.6 billion of direct tax subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. That's a big number. That's every year, $1.6 billion, B as in boy. So we're helping to subsidize our own collective suicide by climate crisis as time goes on. And I've given talks on what the consequences of climate change are. And one of the horrific things that's potentially in our future is collapse of human civilization, coupled with a mass extinction event that is also going to be horrible. We're already at the leading edge of that. So that's real stuff. It's real risk. And it's people don't know when this might happen. So you've got the horrendous risk, and you don't know when it might happen, and you don't know the percentage of this risk. So you've got multiple levels of unknown here, and that's something you really need to worry about. It's like having a gun to your head, and you don't know how many empty chambers there are total, and you don't know how many of them are loaded either. And you're just pulling the trigger every year. You're pulling the trigger more rapidly. So that's the best analogy I can come up with that. And it worries me every day. I have trouble constantly thinking and researching this. So if you see me start to tear up about this, that's why. I deeply care about this, and I understand these risks. And I have sympathy for the climate activists that have been going on for much longer than me on this topic. So again, I'm sorry, I'm losing my composure, but it's hard. The other big number I want to mention, 2017 data from NYSERDA. This is the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. So it's a New York State government agency. They published under what's called the NYSERDA New York State Energy Fast Facts document in 2017 that 26.5 billion, B as in boy, leaves New York State's economy because we're spending money collectively, everybody living in the state and everybody traveling through the state that buys fossil fuels to power their vehicles, whatever they're buying as they travel through. $26.5 billion every year leaves the state from spending money on fossil fuel energy. That's another huge number. And again, this is yearly, every year. So, and if you add the other hidden costs to health, fossil fuel use, just the air pollution alone results in cancer, asthma, cardiovascular disease, dementia, and other ailments, and lost productivity from that, and deaths, sicknesses, deaths. There's spills that require cleanup. There's explosions, fires that, you know, have costs. And I haven't even talked about what the climate related costs are. So there's huge amounts of indirect subsidy too that go to fossil fuels. And to sum up what I'm going to say, and I'll open it up to the floor to look for your thoughts. If we were going to pick an energy system to power New York State's economy or the world's economy, if we had the magic wand to do that, and we were going to do it today, we would not pick fossil fuels. If we were starting from scratch, we would not pick fossil fuels to power our economy. We just wouldn't do it, knowing everything we know. So anyway, thank you for listening to my rant and for putting up with me tearing up and having my little emotional problem. But now I invite anybody that wants to comment, please, you know, either digitally raise your hand or raise your hand physically if we're seeing your video image, or just somehow make a noise so that we know who wants to speak.
Valdi, I just wanted to mention two things relating to the election before we go past that, particularly at the state level. One thing was that the environmental bond did pass. So that's tremendously positive. And I also wanted to put a shout out to a new assembly member. And tonight I'm at second house over in the Hudson Valley, and this is in the 103rd district, where Sarah Hannah Shrestha, she ran as a Democratic socialist. She ran entirely on climate change, and she won big. So she knows maybe how to get this message out in a way that's not happening in other districts. And so I think it would be really great to kind of reach out to her, and I'm sure it's kind of overwhelming having, you know, just won that election, and, you know, then she has to kind of get ready to do it. And she's actually an immigrant from Bhutan.
Oh, and what's her name?
Like I probably mangle it with pronunciation, but it's like Sarah Hannah Shrestha.
And it's the 103rd Assembly District? Okay, I'll research it myself, so you don't have to bother.
There's stories about her in the Kingston Daily Freeman, and, you know, it's kind of been a big, and WAMC, they mentioned it, you know, so over here, and I've seen her signs everywhere, of course, but just to me, this is fascinating that somebody like that could win, and win big. She won 61%. So I just think, you know, one can win with a climate change message.
Very good. Thank you for bringing that up. And also thank you for bringing up the fact that the New York State Bond Act passed, the Environmental Bond Act, Proposition 1. I put notes on my, you know, for my own use later on. 67% of people that voted on this Bond Act voted in favor of it. So that's a huge number. So it shows that people do care about it. And some of that spending is going to be directly on climate, for climate mitigation, for water quality improvement, and providing more resilient infrastructure. So climate directly is $1.5 billion, $650 million for water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure, and then 1.1 billion for restoration and flood risk reduction. So that's another indicator that people out there do care about the environment and they do care about the climate. Before we officially started this meeting, I mentioned that there's polling that shows that 90% of Americans want solar farms. And I believe the number, it was over 80%, but I think it was 83% want more wind farms. And it was somewhere in the 60-something% range, I don't remember exactly, that want action on climate change. Or something to the effect that that's a very important issue for them. So those are all signs showing that the public is coming around to the idea that they realize that climate is an important problem and we do need to address it. So
Valdi,
Jim,
I just wanted to point out, Christina had posted to the chat 2 links to articles about the candidate Sarah Hanna over here in the 103rd district. So
okay, very good. Thank you, Christina. All right, very good. And Jim, go ahead, Jim.
I was going to ask Andy, where exactly is the 103rd? What major communities does it include? And then I have another subject. Go on.
basically around Ulster County with Kingston, New Paltz, Rosendale, High Falls.
Stone Ridge and the rest of them.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I was going back to the election again. I was kind of surprised that Leah Webb won. And I wonder if anybody on this call has some insight into that. Rich David was very well known, very well financed, and somewhat slick. And I don't know that Leah had the same amount in those categories. How did that happen? Does anybody know?
She had Ithaca. Ithaca is what did it.
Right.
Not here, not Broome County. She lost big in Broome, but won in Tompkins.
And I saw
She
a,
campaigned heavily in Ithaca. I thought she lived in Ithaca. She was campaigning there
Right?
somewhere.
No, I think she voted in Johnson City,
Yeah.
but and she was on city council too in Binghamton.
Yeah, she was. But also the Jewish community went out for her too.
But I was surprised that it was Ithaca, I think, that put her over the top.
Yeah. Her signs were everywhere up there.
I agree that Ithaca was a big source of votes for her, but in one of her own videos that she posted, or somebody on her campaign posted to Facebook, I think she also credited Cortland to surprising, voting more than they thought that they would have voted for her. So
Yeah,
I think she kind of gave quite a bit of credit to Cortland as well. So she's got 3 counties basically: Ithaca, Cortland, and then Broome County. So the map is very different than what it used to be.
Well, yeah, she definitely benefited by the redistricting of the Senate district here. So it used to cover Shenango County, and that was no longer part of the district. And I think it went into Delaware County a ways.
Yeah, it stretched farther east, so it's different now. Anybody else have any thoughts on election related, as well as where you would like to see effort and action by elected leaders and or environmental groups, environmental activists, whether it's Susquehanna Group and or Sierra Club, Atlantic Chapter, which is New York State level or even national level, or other political groups like locally, we've got Indivisible Binghamton area, and they've got other, similar groups, Citizen Action. Go ahead, Jim.
I forgot what I was going to say. I was listening to you.
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, no, I know what it was. It was a comment you made, Valdi, that you don't know why climate change wasn't more visible in the campaigns of the people running for office. Well, this makes me remember what former Governor Cuomo used to call this season. He called it silly season, when basically all rationality goes out the window. And I got so much mail um,
Oh,
from all kinds of candidates. So did my sweetheart here,
Thank you.
Candace. And it was so dispiriting because it was all so negative and attack oriented. And I think somebody has decided that this is the correct way to run a winning campaign, is to be as negative and attack oriented as possible. And if somebody puts something out there about being in favor of some climate legislation or climate policies, they probably were thinking they would open themselves up to being anti-economy or some damn thing. And
Yeah,
it was
that's-
it was a very disappointing season for me.
yeah, I agree with you, Jim. I saw the attack ads come right down to the town level even. It was horrible.
Yeah,
And people, when they push these lies about candidates, they're pushing usually people's fear buttons too. And that really latches into people's brains, especially if they're already the type psychologically that is susceptible to this kind of thing. Some people are worried about things and they look at government as being the enemy because they've been trained to think that way, or they're naturally have a predisposition to thinking that way. And they think that, oh, if you're an American, you have to be independent and you want to get government out of the way. This is an echo of what Reagan used to talk about way back. You know, the young people don't remember this from their own memory, but they can look up what Reagan, some of the stuff he said. And he said, if one of the things he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, well, one of the scariest things to hear is I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. So something to that effect is what Reagan said. I didn't say it exactly, but he got kind of, famous for saying that type of a thing. And a lot of people believe that kind of stuff, despite the fact that we owe much of New York, United States economy to the fact that we were one of the earliest ones to have public education, publicly funded education. If you go back to the early 1800s, people had to pay somebody to teach their kids and try to convince somebody that was a traveling school teacher to stop by and teach their kids if they didn't have a school. And many people didn't, so. And the interstate highway system that many people commute back and forth to work on. Well, that was built that was spearheaded by Eisenhower, who was a Republican. And it was called the Eisenhower Interstate Highway System at one point. People drive on this every day, millions of Americans. You're not an individual Marlboro, cigarette smoking, somebody that's, riding a horse in the West. You're driving a car that needs, energy to run the thing, which is governed by regulations. You've got a justice system that makes businesses able to be incorporated and to be able to be run. And you've got roads that are funded by the public and maintained by the public. You've got libraries, schools that are funded by the public. So this idea that we're all individualists, that we don't need government, we just need government out of the way, is just plain nonsense. And yet there's a huge fraction of the population that doesn't have this in their head readily, that I could come up with this, spew this out instantly. So I don't know how you fix that, but anyway, go ahead, John Patterson.
Right.
I see you've got something to say.
Yeah, I worked as a poll election inspector at the Grand Boulevard Methodist Church, the west side of Binghamton. And we had an extremely large turnout. They expected 250, maybe 300, and we had over 650 people show up. Over 50% of that area showed up. And what the results were, all the Democrats won everything. So what the bottom line is, I'm saying, is we got to get people out to vote on our causes. We can't sit back and say, well, the Democratic Party has got to do that. No, we in Sierra Club have got to be knocking on doors and just not endorsing, but we got to get out there and work the streets too. That's the bottom line. When I see 30% of people show up, that doesn't tell me anything. It just tells me a strong party was out there politicking in that area. Over 52% of this area in that area showed up. And I mean, we had to call in extra help. We had to call in, I mean, we had people out in the streets 20, 30 deep. And again, it's the people came out. There was more signs in that neighborhood. People came out and voted.
What
That's the
precinct
bottom
was,
line.
what precinct was this again?
This was on the corner of Floral Avenue and Graham Boulevard in the west side of Binghamton. And again,
Ram,
where?
Ram Boulevard,
Grand,
R-A-N.
G-R-A-N,
Grand.
Grand Boulevard and Floral Avenue.
Oh, Grand, sorry. Okay, sorry,
Okay.
sorry.
And if you go back and look at other areas, I bet there was more 30, 35% showed up. They just don't show up. And that's the problem we have is people don't show up to vote.
Yeah,
And then, so I'm just throwing that out that we as Sierra Club members got to be out there advertising and just sit back and, well, it's the Democratic Party, the Republican Party has got to do it. No, we have to be out there helping get these voters out.
yeah, I agree. We could use more help. I was called and asked and I had to say no, sadly. I can't do more than I'm already doing. So I had to push back. There's things that, I've got to do myself, for my own family and my own house that I've put off that I can't always keep up with. So other members, we've got over 1,000 members in Sierra
Sure.
Club across
Over
these
1,000
6
members.
counties. Yeah, we need to have other people show up and volunteer, do more things.
Even if we
So,
called our own members and said, please support what we stand for, that would be a big help.
yes, and we put out the message and very few people, if any, showed up. I know Scott did, but that's not enough, considering we have 1,000 members. I don't know if there were a few other people that might have, maybe we're not aware of, but
I'll just add, there was an effort to call Sierra Club members for the congressional district 19 that Riley and Molinaro were running in. That was done through the chapter.
that's good. All
I don't know
right.
if Paul got
Yeah,
got called from them, but
thank you for that. And thank you for what you did too. I know you did a lot of work on the, basically doing most of the work on the political committee locally here. And we did more than
My
you
wife
normally do.
Cecily did a fantastic amount. She was knocking on doors and leaving brochures, 2 or 3 times a week, and it pays off. It pays off, So that's my comment.
Who did you just say?
My wife, Cecily O'Neill.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I missed the name. Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Cecily. And thank you, John, for helping out with that. That's good news. I'm glad that somebody was, that's, Sierra Club members. I appreciate that effort and I thank you for it. Any other members or of the audience here that have thoughts that they want to add to the discussion? You can take it in a different direction too, if you want to.
I'll go again.
Okay. Oh,
Um,
wait, hold on a second, Jim. Can you hold that thought?
Sure.
Oh, sorry. No, it's just my cursor. I thought somebody had their hand up. Never mind. It's you. You're next. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about this dreadful series of attacks that occurred during this campaign, and was wondering if there might be a better way. If some, and I think Hochul showed this to some extent during the debate with Zeldin, and that is to be actually more respectful of the intelligence of the voters, and to not paint everything as the house is on fire and only I have the water to put it out. But to let some nuances in and to let some pros and cons into the discussions of the issues, and actually appreciate the voters' ability to parse out uh, sometimes contradictory ideas, and but it would be a much more respectful way to go. And I wonder if voters being treated with that kind of respect would be more likely to vote for a candidate that projected that. Maybe anybody in this group that ran in the last election might have an opinion on that.
I would say I'm a local candidate. And I mean, that's what I focus on. You guys seem to be very focused on national and state politics, and that's great, but I have to win people locally. And I need to talk about issues that affect, like, I mean, we run the dump. We run BC Transit. I mean, you can talk on broad swaths about climate change, and there are things we can do. But the whole like think globally, act locally. Like I'm a lot more on the act locally, for better or for worse. I think when you get too caught up in the national stuff, you make enemies of people who would otherwise be your friends.
Mhm.
And I really try to focus on this from a bipartisan way, which I don't even bring up party. Like it's just obvious that we should just conserve, good lands around here. We should look for conservation easements. We should do development near towns, not out in the boonies. Of course, we want solar farms. Like I'll tell you, that is wildly agreed upon. People want solar. They want wind. They just don't want either in one of these things next door. You will see that over and over again. They love it, but they don't want it next door. I really bristle at turning this thing into politics because you lose half the population. And that's not good because this is too important to lose half the population. Things don't get fixed when it's 51-49. They get worse.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for expressing those good thoughts. I wish there were more people such as yourself. But I have seen the other side of this, and I have seen a person who was in state level politics, who did represent this area, come attend a Zoom meeting against a solar farm that was proposed in the town of Owego. And I called that person out on that. I said, why are you opposing this? And, there really isn't a good answer other than, oh, well, there's people that expressing concerns.
A little bit. We had a solar farm come up. The county is thinking about doing allowing someone to lease land next to the airport and to do a solar farm, which in theory is a great idea. It really is. But they did a terrible job on the paperwork, the seeker, and all the rest of it. And Susie Ryan and myself voted against it the first time. And we're like the two biggest environmentalists on the legislature. And I called her on the phone and I'm like, they've managed to make the environmentalists vote against this by doing it so bad. You gotta be careful. Sometimes the devil's really truly in the details. It came back up, we made them fix things and we voted for it. But you can't always just accept things by the vote. There's a lot going on behind the scenes to try to make things right. And I mean, I have been amazed the degree to which believing that one side or the other is going to fix things is really screwing everything up. We just have to start acting. That's the thing. And the more our mouths move, the less we get done.
I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly, and I wish it were true. But from where I sit, I, again, also at the Industrial Development Agency, the IDA. I spoke in favor of a project that almost got shut down, and the people that were voting against it tended to be on what you consider people that we should assume the best about. So
Elected, who do you mean? Elected officials assume the best about? That's almost like unbelievable to say. I mean, I hold my nose the whole time an elected official. I try to stay out of I really, you got to stay out of the culture wars. You'll never win. You know, that's the
What-
thing.
but I'm not trying to make it an environmental activist. We don't want to make it a culture war. We want to have.
One of the, I didn't even want to say this, but I love getting your endorsement, but sometimes I worry that by being political, you actually make yourselves less effective. For instance, so one of the reasons I started the Southern Tier Land Conservancy with a couple other guys was because we wanted to stay completely non-political. Like, we realized that if this got in the hands of the government, it wasn't going to work right. And if we let the politicians run it, in fact, I brought up the idea that I don't think our chair should ever be an elected official. I see too many of these boards become political footballs. I mean, I'm on the Village of Endicott tree board right now. And the trees in Endicott have become a political football, and it really stinks. It really stinks. And people are clamoring to get on these boards at both town, village, state level, so they can look like they're going to do the right thing. And
Yeah,
hey,
which
maybe
party?
they-
Which party was opposing this Tree City USA? You don't have to answer that question, but you know what that party was, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's a party though. It's a number of people there. And when you talk about Endicott, you've got some really weird things going on there. You've got 12 or 13,000 voters who are supposed to elect 5 members of a board and a mayor. They're almost all, it is not the group that once lived there. They are then given the responsibility for running Huron, like for zoning Huron campus. And what comes in is multinational lawyers who overpower them, take them to the dry cleaners. That whole battery incinerator thing, they got fed such a line by the state and the IDA and all the rest, and they were completely outgunned. We got really lucky to avoid it. And yeah, some activists got involved, and that was really great. I know Bill Houston from a long time ago. I mean, but a big part of your problem is more systemic than it is partisan. There are serious, I don't know, deficiencies to having such a small group, and I mean all of Endicott, responsible for that almost statewide organization there, which is the Huron campus. They're just not prepared to do it.
I agree the expertise wasn't there. And I also give credit to Bill Houston. If he ever watches this video, he'll appreciate this. I spoke out in support of him, and he alerted me, and I thanked him openly in public for alerting me to this what ended up being referred to as an incinerator, battery incinerator. And initially, I also thought that this company, because they had an existing plant in Korea that they were modeling it after, that I looked at the emissions that they sampled from the plant in Korea, assuming that the company was telling the truth. And of course, that's a big assumption. And what I wasn't aware of is the fact that there are PFAS type compounds in batteries. And I give a lot of credit to the PhD chemist researchers that kept digging into this. When we had a couple of them that stepped up to help lead the technical effort, and then even the PR effort that became No Burn Broom. And they persisted. And then the Susquehanna group as well, we had a core group of people that kept at it. And even though I wrote in an essay initially that kind of expressed my own opinion based on looking at this, that I thought this was probably going to be okay, but we would keep looking at it. And I had reached out to the DEC as well, and they took my comments and actually added extra things monitoring requirements onto what their initial permit was. So I was happy they were listening to me. They actually listened to me for like an hour and a half, and my wife even added
It's
some
worth
things in
noting
too.
that the main argument became between the Republican Linda Jackson and Ted Warner and Doug Courtwright and Nick Burlingame, who are also Republicans. So like you can use politics as a kaleidoscope to see anything the way you want.
Yeah,
Another thing about the tree board is one of the reasons a small municipality doesn't want more boards is they got to put people on them. And it's really hard to find people. That is truly a problem. I'm on the Willow Point Nursing Home Advisory Board, and we're supposed to rotate our members. I'm sure you see this in your own thing. We're supposed to rotate members after 2 terms. Well, we got rid of that rule because there's no way we'd ever have enough people there.
Yeah.
Some of the people have been there for almost 20 years because
Yep.
nobody else wants to do it. And for better or for worse, these people are really invested, and I love that. But it does show there's a real hole in our democracy that goes beyond Republican Democrat. People are not civically engaged. And the more you make it into a blame game, the less civically engaged they want to become. I talk to young people who think it's ridiculous that I even run. They're like, why would you put yourself out there and take the kind of invective that comes from people? Why would you want to attend these meetings? They're so boring. Blah, 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 blah. Well, I don't, sometimes I think I'm crazy too. But it's at the end of the day, when you do manage to get a few good things done and you have people from both sides helping you. I can't remember the last time I did something good that I didn't have people from both sides there.
that's great. I really love that. And I'm sure that probably most of the audience members that are part of this meeting also love that. I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to work across this party divide that has become more exaggerated, through the decades, and especially in
I
recent
think that I
years.
have a little more pull by being on the Republican side, that it allows me to speak more freely with other Republicans and hopefully get things done. I mean, that's the thing. You don't want to pull everyone to your side. You will get less done. You
Yeah.
need the people on both sides.
Yep. And to give a little bit of credit to the Sierra Club in general, the Sierra Club organization does not try to just favor one side. We have not excluded people just because they've got a certain alphabetical letter next to their name related to their party designation. So if people are willing to answer the questions and to go through the process, and they give answers that make sense, that we're willing to support, we welcome that. And we've endorsed you, as you well know. We've endorsed other people that have been in your party in the past. I assume I don't have infinite history in this local organization myself, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but
Chris Berger.
Oh yeah, definitely Chris Berger.
oh yeah, okay. Well, there's a secret that at least a secret to me. I didn't know that he was in that party. Well, welcome aboard, Chris Berger. I had no idea. So you're right, Jason. My brain is a little clouded too, and I'm gonna try to be more open to this. But sadly, a lot of what you see and a lot of what I have experienced has been the other way, where you're working on something and then it gets undercut and advertised against and smeared and fear-mongered, and then it gets shut down. And some of what happened in New York State with renewable energy projects, many of them got shut down at the local municipal level, village level, town level. So New York State was not able to get enough renewable energy projects. They dwindled down to just a handful a year. So they put in the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, and they modified the law. So it's more difficult for a small little village to undercut a project. And now, of course, people are mad about that. But
I got a question for Jason at some point, which is,
Go ahead.
As your, you know, in your capacity in the legislature, I mean, certain projects obviously, were undertaken out of a sense of the future. So for instance, the Greenway. I mean, as I've watched that kind of get constructed and, at really.
Greenway, what do you mean? What is the Greenway?
The Greenway is I would call it kind of a bike pedestrian,
Oh, you mean from Binghamton to Vestal?
The 363 Greenway.
Okay,
yes, it's sometimes called the Two Rivers Greenway.
yeah, okay.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
So the fact that or with BC Transit, I mean, one of my kind of darker predictions is simply that the number of cars is going to decrease over the next decade, and especially as this mandate of having, no more internal combustion cars gets closer, assuming that it stays and it never gets walked back. But so in that sense, you could say that BC Transit and the Greenway and those kinds of projects are going to be really important for the future. And I don't know how far ahead people are looking. I mean, obviously to get the battery plant, to get some of these things that have happened, people really did have to be tuned into these opportunities and the fact that that is going to be the future.
I'm pretty sure the Greenway passed unanimously, and BC Transit, it's one of those odd things. There are probably people who might vote against it for whatever reason, but because it's mostly federal money, everyone votes for it every time. And we've done a pretty good job of moving away from, fossil fuel driven vehicles. And I do know that Greg Kilmer, who is a Republican actually, is quite forward thinking on the whole thing. He would love to see the future you're talking about. He's really into public transit in a big way, and he really loves electric vehicles.
But if you do the math, you think, okay, I got a car that's going to cost $50,000 now. Well, in 2035, that car will cost $85,000. Well, how many people are going to be able to buy that car? My guess is not a whole lot of them. So what
I
are
don't
they
know.
going to do?
I
They're
think I
gonna-
would actually predict if we head to EVs, I think you'll see more vehicles rather than less. I mean, whenever electronics get involved, you usually end up with more. They'll be electric, but my suspicion is there'll be even more because really when you get into the internals of the EVs, the motors and engines are much simpler.
They're simpler, but the materials are expensive and they're getting scarce. So
Yeah,
and,
they are
and
for a while, but I mean, we have smart people like Stanley, the Nobel Prize
oh,
winner.
yeah, no,
We'll come up with
nothing.
something.
He invented this, so it's definitely. But I don't think it's so simple as just, one thing is going to replace another and nobody's going to see the difference. I think it's going to be a big change, and I do think it'll impact public transportation and using
That
bikes and
very well
e-bikes.
might be true. I mean, I don't disagree. Unfortunately, a lot of that will come from the federal government because most
Yes.
of transit is funded by the federal government.
And also, as far as the federal money that comes through the Inflation Reduction Act and, gets down to the state level, which then gets down to the county level. So,
Mhm.
but, I guess I look at our area, the Triple Cities, as, being in a kind of competition with many other parts of the country. And at the moment, we're kind of winning, we're doing pretty well. Taxes are kind of being held and yet these new opportunities are going to come around. I think housing is going to be a big deal. And, how we do mandates for housing in terms of code and whether or not you get rid of gas right away and those kinds of things are going to affect it. And obviously we all know homelessness is an increasing problem, I think, just because places to live have gotten very expensive, and it's hard to build new ones that are for, kind of lower income percentage of the population.
Yeah, I agree with some of both of what you just said, between Jason and Andy. I think it's going to be a blend of both. The biggest single component of electric vehicles is the battery pack in terms of price, and also it's a huge share of the weight as well. But the local company that started production August 12th this past summer, IM3 New York, Imperium 3 New York, which is a spinoff of research done at Binghamton University, they've got improved chemistry that will make the materials that go into it less expensive, more environmentally friendly, and the charging speed for these batteries to be shorter. So that's going to, and it'll end up being costing less too when it gets incorporated into a vehicle. And there's many other companies and research organizations that are working on the same problem. And they're not just limited to lithium ion batteries. There are people working on other ideas in terms of batteries as well. So the cost of the battery packs, which is the major component in terms of price for electric vehicles, is going to continue to come down with time, year by year. And the countervailing argument is also true that many people, even if you bring the price of a new vehicle down to $13,000-$14,000, there are people that can't afford that, because even the insurance cost is like $1,000 a year. So it's beyond the reach of people that are struggling to put food on the table and pay their rent.
But keep in mind that not all cars will be driven by individuals. There are going to be very many large organizations that are going to be either leasing them or running your stuff around with them. Like Amazon will probably have 3 cars for every person in America delivering their stuff 24/7. And that's why I think there's going to be an explosion. I don't know how many more cars I need at my house, regardless of the price. Like, 1 per person is more than enough. Maybe a third to like haul heavy stuff, go really fast. I don't know.
That's
Like,
not
I'm not really sure.
necessary.
What would I need another one for?
You
But
don't.
But
You could rent.
Amazon needs a bunch.
You could rent a truck at Home Depot.
I think the
You need-
line between car and flying vehicle is actually going to blur too. I mean, you're going to see drones in a big way, and they're a lot lighter than passenger vehicles. That's the thing.
Yeah, and the other thing is going to be self-driving technology too, so you won't even have to be relying on Grubhub or DoorDash or these things to deliver your food or to even bring you somewhere. You won't need a taxi driver, and trucks may not eventually need a truck driver either. So that's in the future too. There's lots of very powerful engineers, computer programmers, and companies with lots of money that are working on that goal. There's many of them. That's going to come true eventually. We're not there yet. It could still be years away. Yeah, sure.
Baldy Ed Fay has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Ed.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment. Andy said something about the cost of an electric car and referred to the figure of $50,000. If you look at the Chevy Bolt now, the base price on the Bolt is a little over $25,000. The Bolt EUV, the kind of a slightly bigger one, is $27,000. I mean, of course, in actuality, you would pay more than that. But there's an
my
example.
understanding is that is somewhat of a deal right now, but other times of the year, if you've gone and looked on cars.com or, they're more like 40,000. So and there's different trim levels, of course. But just in general, cars are expensive, and they're getting more expensive, and they're getting harder to afford by many people. And EVs are no exception to that. And the Inflation Reduction Act credits are going to be kind of difficult to apply in a few years, potentially, because of the restrictions on materials have to be mined in North America. There has to be a manufacturing plant in North America. I mean, there's just all kinds of reasons why a lot of the cars that are now available are not going to get credits. So
There's a great opportunity for mining in North America now, lithium that is, from the Salton Sea. It's quite likely to become a fairly significant source of lithium.
yes, and we'll wait and hope that that happens.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
it's starting to happen.
Yep, and there's also a company working on developing a hard rock deposit in, I think it's North Carolina.
North Carolina, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's the mineral they're looking for is called spodumene, SPODUMENE. And of course, there's controversy on that too. The people that live close by to this, many of them don't want it. So there's a fight involved in that too. And of course, there's an environmental question too. How adequate are the existing regulations to prevent pollution? You know, can those be improved? So that's something that needs to be looked at closely as well. And then there's companies working on improved processes for extracting and concentrating the lithium and getting them actually into a usable material to put into batteries. So, and people are working on eliminating some of the metals like cobalt that are questionable in terms of some of them from the Democratic Republic of Congo use some child labor. So they're minimizing and getting ready to eliminate that. And then they're trying to minimize the amount of nickel because that's expensive too. So there's people working on these problems. Let me finish the thought I had before too. I think various forms of mass transit are going to be expanded, and I hope that they're going to be expanded more quickly. And as Jason mentioned, aviation is a more difficult thing to approach, but people are working on electrifying that too. And they're coming up with brand new clean sheet designs to electrify aviation. And one of the earlier successful companies is likely to be a company called Eviation, EVIATION. And they have an airplane that is now gaining orders because they had a successful series of flights, test flights. They had their first flight a few months back. Their aircraft is called Alice, ALICE, and it's a very beautiful looking aircraft. In addition to being fully battery powered, it's unfortunately still relatively small. I think the amount of passengers it can carry is around 19 or so, maybe 20. And the distance is nowhere near as big. You can't go across the ocean, for example, but for short haul regional travel, it fits a nice slot. So this is going to be something to watch, and there's other companies working on this idea too. And then the other thing we should do, we should be embarrassed by China being able to build thousands of miles of high-speed rail, whereas the US has maybe built a handful of miles and then kind of stalled. And we need to improve our rail service, and we need to improve our other forms of public transit. And so anyway, I'm going to stop there and let John, he's got his hand up. Go ahead, John Patterson.
Hey, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. There's a new battery technology coming out, and you might want to follow it. It's a carbon battery. Carbon battery is a natural carbon, and it's less expensive. It weighs less, and naturally the cost is less than the lithium batteries too. So it's just being produced. And there's a lot of technology, but just something we may want to follow, that just don't rely all on lithium. The carbon battery is really starting to be developed. And the second thing I'd like to be, you go over to Europe, go to Asia, I don't care where you go, and look at the mass transit systems. Ours is like we're on horse and buggies compared to them. More people should be riding the buses. Maybe we should have a lot of mini buses around, taking people to just not main routes, but other small routes. And in small towns, there's no mass transit in Wego, for an example. taking people around, and more of these senior citizens don't really want to drive. They'd like to have small mass transit take them someplace. Where are we? You know, we got to get on our, and again, our Amtrak system is not great compared to the Europe. You know, it's, I mean, can we catch a rail service from here to Syracuse or to Albany? No. That's it.
Thank you, John. Yeah, we should definitely open our shutters and blinders and see what we can learn from our own past as well as from other countries. And that's something that, unfortunately, because of the hyper patriotism that we're sort of raised with, we think that America is the best in everything, and that's obviously not the case. So I just hope people are willing to look beyond our borders, even at Canada, even at a smaller nation like Costa Rica that is close to, it's in the 90% range of getting its energy from renewable energy. Most of that is hydroelectric, but so be it. And there are other countries that are way ahead of us in developing renewable energy in the form of solar and wind. We're just now finally starting to build offshore wind. We've only got 5 working offshore turbines that are in commercial production for producing electricity off the southern coast of Block Island, which is part of my home state of Rhode Island, where I grew up. It's just five medium-sized turbines. It's no big deal. It was just sized a little bit bigger than what Block Island, the small summer resort island, needs. And then they as part of this installation, they built an undersea cable linking it with the mainland. So if they're generating extra power in the winter, they send it to the grid on land. And if they need more power for peak in summertime, they can draw off the grid from the land. And that works beautifully. It allowed them to shut down big diesel generators that they used to rely on the island for their electricity. So this was a great project, but that's from many years ago already, and only now is the United States starting to sign contracts with developers to build offshore wind in a big way, which we should have done a decade and a half ago. So John Patterson, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought I was off, but just a note, way back in, let's say, the 1970s or thereabouts, it was 1960s, General Motors was the one that killed the idea of mass transit because it was more profitable to build buses than the locomotives.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. I don't have the details in my brain, but part of it was behind the scenes, they worked to try to get the cities to stop funding upkeep of the embedded rails that had, trolleys. And also, when I was a kid in the capital city, Providence, Rhode Island, I remember seeing what looked like buses, but they had, shoes, catenary that would be drawing electricity off wires above them. So they'd had rubber tires, but they were getting electricity to actually run. And I think you're right, John, that GM was trying to work behind the scenes to kill off whatever was running off of electricity in cities. And they were pretty successful at that. And that's unfortunate because a lot of trolley tracks were ripped up. They even connected small villages and what used to be mills producing clothing, fabric, yarn across, especially New England. And we also need to work on agriculture too. We can improve agriculture so that it reduces its greenhouse gas footprint. We can move to techniques such as regenerative agriculture that foster soil health, to use the beneficial microorganisms that are in the soil to help sequester the carbon, CO2 in the soil. They can actually be a positive in terms of pulling greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and putting them into the soil. and combination of using cover crops too that do some of this. And then minimizing the use of fossil fuel inputs and fertilizer inputs. A big component of what produces artificial fertilizers is fossil fuels. So there's ways to do farming, and if you localize farming as much as you can, then you reduce the transportation costs in that greenhouse footprint too. So there's things we can do in the agricultural sector that can improve things related to climate change and provide more nutritious food as well. So there are things we can do. And again, I don't remember if I said this during the official part of the meeting that got recorded, but we have the technology. There was a study that came out from Stanford University. The person that led the study is a professor and a research professor. His name is Mark Jacobson. And this study showed the result that just with the existing technology and solar power, electrical solar power, as well as wind turbines, the existing technology we have, coupled with lithium ion based energy storage, the existing lithium ion battery systems that we have, no new exotic chemistry required, no other types of batteries required, no other exotic or new mechanical forms of storage required. Just those forms alone, we can transition the entire United States energy needs, including transportation. We can electrify all of transportation. And that can be powered with renewable energy and will result in a net savings. But the kicker is it requires an initial investment. And that people have also looked at this worldwide. Again, same answer. It can be done technically. And there's also the wealth out there. There's wealth that isn't being taxed right now that is benefiting from huge tax benefits that needs to be much of this, I don't know what you want to call it, tax loopholes, custom tax breaks. Much of this needs to be undone, and we need to raise rates, add more brackets too, so that we can bring some of this money and apply it to save ourselves from the worst of climate change. And then the other thing is corporations, same thing. Corporations have been given huge tax breaks, and that a lot of that needs to be undone. So we have the ability to technically do it. The public will is there from polling. People want to see this happen, and we have the funding to do it. So there, and if we don't do it, we're already suffering huge health costs and huge numbers of deaths, and we've got the climate, extreme weather events that are causing huge amounts of damage to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and that's rising. So all of this says we need to do this. We need to transition our economy to be based on renewable energy. So go ahead, Jason.
Thank you. I promised my family that I would be done around 9. And there are a few important things I'd like to tell you that I have been working on. Again, I really try to focus on local. I mean, I think it's great that everybody's thinking about the nation, but I feel like you work from your house out. And a couple interesting things that you jogged in my mind is that in the course of working through the Southern Tier Land Conservancy and our mission and things we want to get done, it came to my attention that one really big thing that we missed. So if you'll recall, when I came here, we talked very much about Julian Shepard's natural inventory and how about biological diversity, wetlands, riverbanks, all really important areas for us to conserve. Well, as I got talking, basically we did a stakeholder kind of, tried to get in touch with all the major stakeholders, some of which are like Waterman Conservation, Ross Park Zoo. Waterman is actually probably the largest single private conservator in the area other than like Broome County, because it's got almost 500 acres under conservation. And then I got talking to CCE and Vines, and together they sort of came up with an idea about local agriculture that I had never considered. Take this statistic. Locally, there are 10 farmers over the age of 60 for every one under 30. Now, not all those farmers over 60 are farming their land anymore. A lot of them are letting them lay fallow. They're just sitting there. Their kids don't want to farm. Their kids moved away. They're not even sure they want the land. It represents a tax liability. So here's this land. We, at the same time, we have people coming into the area. A lot of them are immigrants, actually, who know a lot about farming, but they don't own any land. Then you got Vines, who I worked with to create a community garden. It was one of the first things I did as a legislator. And my relationship with Amelia there is very good. We got talking about the idea of like a small farm incubator, about how there might be a way. CCE loved this and took it a bit farther and said they'd love to talk to the people who own large swaths of land and see if any of them are interested in basically matching it to local would-be farmers to do local food production. So that this land that's usually very good land next to, you know, streams and rivers and creeks, we don't want it falling into the hands of just parking lots and things like that. So this is the kind of land that should get put together. The other thing that needs to then happen is, as a conservation group, we'd probably create a buffer between the creek and the farm. We'd also have certain restrictions on kind of covenants. You know, we'd write a lease, basically a conservation easement that would only allow certain kinds of farming, you know, whether it be organic or sustainable or whatever our desires were there. That's the kind of thing we would like to connect that would-be local farmer with the local landowner who's no longer farming, to create a win-win situation. And I'll give you a third win on it. The first win is we'd be hooking these farmers up, right? And we'd be giving us local food with more jobs for local people. Next thing is we're keeping it out of the hands of developers who'll just turn it into little micro mansions. I guess a third, and then a fourth. Third is we're protecting the water quality, which like soil and what the heck's the Broome County Soil and Water District love. NCRS loves it. Like there's a lot of organizations that love this idea. So you then protect the water quality, and then you go upstream a little farther. God, and oh man, I lost the big one. There's one up the stream I'm trying to think about that doesn't always get thought of, which is, gosh, God, I lost it, but it'll come back to me. As I think about it more, we hadn't thought about this idea at all. And it wasn't until I went around and talked to our local organizations about what we could do here that this started to come. And that's it. What CCE said to me was, and actually Waterman said it and Vine said it, they all said, we love your idea. How are you going to fund it? And we didn't know. Well, we got some nice donations from you guys when we were here. But even that, I mean, how many times can we really tap people for you know, small donations? We can keep going after grants. But what they said is, if you can get the right land and you can come up with the right matching criteria and really reach out to people, you'd start to collect money from leases. And that could be put toward going after Julian Shepard's natural inventory.
Yeah, maybe what was escaping your memory, maybe preserving forests that.
Oh no, it was the using the money to go after other things, that it generates an income for Southern Tier Land Conservancy. And that money can then be put into going after the biological diversity, the wetlands, the riverbed, the things that aren't going to return money to the Southern Tier Land Conservancy and actually cost us money.
Okay.
You know, like in a financial organization, you got to make some money somewhere. We can get grants and donations, but ultimately it would be nice to have some form of income derived from doing the right thing, whether we then leased it out to solar farms. I mean, if we could do the same lease agreement that the county is doing for ourselves as a nonprofit and turn that money around and buy other stuff with it that needs to be bought and held, boy, like that's just a win, 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 win.
That's a good thought too. Keep that in your mind, that if you get enough land that you could get a solar farm put on it and maybe plant it with native, plants that are kind of rare, you know, in the area because of agriculture, you know, kind of monocropping with stuff that doesn't normally belong here. And, you know, when people put suburbs in, they just plant grass. So there's a lot of native grasses and flowers and things like that, that shrubbery and stuff like that, that you could have beneath solar panels and still make money off of it. And you would be adding to the diversity of the area that is part of it is lost. which
Now,
is this native
another thing that
grassland.
came up when I went around, Ross Park Zoo came up with something that I'd never ever thought of as well. Keep in mind, Ross Park Zoo is at the end of what was once the trolley line that you're talking about. It used to
Yeah.
be the end. And it used to be 95 acres, but somewhere in the past it lost 30 acres, which is an interesting thing to look into. Anyway, while I was there, he said that there are other zoos that use land conservancies to basically help them revitalize certain either completely endangered or more likely regionally endangered or semi-endangered species. He said that in Utica, they are rehabilitating snails and they need land for it. You'll probably remember when BU, when it was called SUNY Binghamton, had the lizards going across the road and they had the little ramps for them, right? So like those are some small but important projects. Like I hadn't even thought about the zoo till somebody said you should go visit Phil at the zoo. He'll probably have a few thoughts, and he did. Like there
Good.
are so many good thoughts out there. And the one that I think gets lost too is conservation easements. We are a powerhouse of green across the world here. We have so many trees and we can put more in, that would be great, but we don't get paid for them. We are by happenstance, by luck, a place full of trees, or bad luck, some people would say. The lack of development is a lot of what makes us such a good climate, I don't know, carbon sink, I guess, is because we're not being developed. Do you want it to only be by luck? Or do you want to start paying people for doing the right thing? And this is where conservation easements will come in, where the state's 30 by 30, this idea of conserving 30% of New York State by 2030, better carry a bunch of money with it so that we can actually put some stuff into conservation easement, which is really, after simple ownership, the next step for a land conservancy here. It is legally far more complex. That is why we are starting with simple ownership. I believe Broome County will be involved in this. I believe that Broome County will probably give the conservancy a few pieces of land that it really doesn't want to own anymore. What ends up happening is Broome County ends up having people default on their taxes. And most of the time they get sent back out to auction and sold at highest bid. The problem is some of these places are wetlands and there's not a damn thing you can do with it other than look at it. You can't develop it. You really can't do anything. Why people keep buying them only to default on their taxes again? It costs Broome County a lot of money to foreclose on people. And then to turn around and sell it to the highest bidder, which isn't much, at auction, is a complete waste of our resources. So instead, it would be good to have a local organization to disposition some of these things too. The thing
Good.
is, we can't just hold any piece of land that Broome County doesn't want. It's got to have conservation value. So like we got to be careful. Other land conservancies will tell you, be careful what you wish for. You don't want people just dropping land on you that isn't really conservable. Like, so, we got to protect ourselves from Broome County. But as a legislator on Broome County, I have a unique perspective on it and a lot of access to our parks department, our planning department. I try to stay away from elected officials. I try to stay away from the politics. The moment they get involved, the problems begin. You want to work with department heads to come up with plans that solve their problems. They want us to get buffer zones around parks. They would love the idea of combining Jones Park with Aquaterra Park, making that a forever, whether it be a conservation easement or whatnot. Like, you run the risk of that area in between being logged and turned into natural gas or something else. I don't know what. It's primarily one or two big owners that own the area between those two parks. I don't know why they own it, but someday we're going to find out. And if they'd like to do a conservation easement, that would be fantastic. If they want to outright sell it and turn the place into some sort of regional park, that would be really nice too. I think these are things we should be looking into. The Brickyard in Binghamton, gorgeous, even though it's really from man-made disaster. It is full of like little microclimates and ecology systems there. Connecting to the Finger Lakes Trail, though it's a really long shot that would take probably decades to pull off. If nobody's talking about it, it's never going to happen. So like those are some of the things I've been kind of working on, and I wanted to get them out. I don't know how much it is as an elected official. Really, I'm doing this as a private citizen who happens to have some better access to our department heads. Rather than, you haven't seen any of this come up in the legislature. It will eventually, it will,
Well,
but I want it to be slam dunk when it gets there. I don't want it to be a political football that just turns into Jason's doing this to better himself for the Democrats or something, and then it'll just fail, you know?
yeah, no, we're certainly going to be mindful of that, and I don't want to alienate you or your efforts either personally or professionally. These are all great things you're working on, and I appreciate that. And I'm sure that most of our members would appreciate that too, if they understood what you're trying to do. But
think you
also
do.
I
No,
want to
I get it.
remind,
I
go
get
ahead.
it. I come to you guys because I really do think you believe in the things I believe in. I think that perhaps where I'm putting the lens is just different, you know, and I have a unique position to actually do it. You guys are stuck in the position of you sort of are watching, and the news that comes at you is very national. You're happy to get some state. It's almost impossible to get any local information. And I just happen to be in the fire here, and you guys are sort of sitting around it, and you're doing the right thing. I really do think so. You got to keep that in mind. We want to get as many people on our side as possible. This is the only way we're going to get things done.
Okay, thank you for all your efforts and
My pleasure.
for participating in this meeting too. You're the only elected official that actually showed up. So I give you,
Chris Berger would
great
be proud.
great kudos for that. And I know that that's risky. So thank you for doing that. And I also want to give you a little idea too.
Yeah.
Why can't the county hang on to some property that is marginal? Maybe it's, swampland or wetland or an intermittent, like a vernal pool type
What
of
we
thing.
do, so in my district here in Enwell, we sort of just managed to take another 25 acres or so and put it together with a watershed called Brixius Watershed. So, the thing is, it has to fulfill some county need, and that would be generated by an executive who wanted a certain thing to be done. So the executive at the moment doesn't really want to add park space because it normally would go to the Parks Department. The Parks Department normally holds our land. It would need to be adjacent to a park. This piece of land was a wetland next to the Brixius watershed, and there was some talk of auctioning it back off, but we said, sell a little bit of it. The part that somebody can put is right in the neighborhood, sell that off, get the money you need to pay for the foreclosure. But then you take the vast majority of it and you add it onto Brixius watershed, which is really a win for everybody. We shouldn't be putting houses there for a number of reasons. Number one, it's a wetland, but two, they have built houses in wetlands. And I'll tell you, when I go to the doors of those people, they are super mad about the fact that their basements flood and nobody told them about it. We don't need that either.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And it shouldn't just be wetlands that are protected too. There are places that are, steep slopes, very
Yep.
rocky, difficult to build on. In my mind, there's no reason why the county, if it gets such land, why they can't just hang on to it. Maybe in the
agree.
future,
It is hard, though, to talk to our current officials on both sides of this about this. For whatever reason, they are so hell-bent on development. You take the BAE site. I have been telling them they need a solar farm there for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. And they always are like, oh, yeah, maybe. But in the background, they're all wanting to do something else. Well, in the meantime, we've been sitting for 6 years with the place empty. We could have had a solar farm there. We talked to BU. We talked to the hospitals. They would have happily taken all the power from that. And it would have been a real win.
And it's got easy access to the
Yes.
grid connection
Yes.
because that plant had the big, huge transformer. So it's right there.
And if you
And-
could then extend it out and take out the old Gaudi station and just make the whole thing one big, great, like make it a small park. I've heard about these like solar flowers that will open with the sun, like make it a nice experience for people. If we're really supposed to be a place of higher technology, like this is a great way. Make a solar park.
Yes, and it could be a showcase for small micro turbines too. You could do many things with this. You could show how you can combine solar with some limited agriculture. You could have native grasses. there's many things you could do. You could showcase technology being developed at Binghamton University. You could put a testing ground in there for energy storage as well. There's lots of things that could be done. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Thank you. Jason, Donna Lupardo spoke to our group recently. And a lot of her thinking with the Agriculture Committee at the Assembly is right in line with what you're dealing with. She was also aware of the aging out of farmers and looking for some state incentives through legislation that would assist the farms staying operational and moving to a younger cohort. She was looking at the availability of farmland for solar installations, but with the caveat that the best or the better farmland would not be developed for solar. The solar
Agreed.
would be on the hills and so forth. And I'm hearing a lot of parallelism in the way you're thinking and the way she's thinking.
Yeah.
So if you have an opportunity, if you
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
already, you
Yeah.
might spend a little time with her.
She's very interested, and I feel like in the next couple of months, now that the election's finally behind everyone, it's going to be easier to talk about things again.
Yeah, well, she was very reflective when we spoke with her.
Good.
Yeah, and also just to allay some of your fears and concerns, Jason, we're not just focused on state level and national level stuff. We're looking at local stuff too. We have dug into, I and other people that helped me, we spent easily over 100 hours of research and discussion time. And even beyond that, time writing an essay and keeping people up to date on what was going on with what became known as the battery incinerator project. That took up a lot of our time, our volunteer effort, probably closer to 200 hours. And much of it was me. And then the other thing we've looked at is on the opposite side of the spectrum, the beneficial aspect that we're getting new jobs and new industries in our area, in the old IBM complex. IM3 New York, building lithium-ion batteries with improved chemistry. Ubiquity Solar, that is also hiring people. And then at the eastern end of the county, I forgot the name of it.
Bluestone.
Yeah.
Well, Bluestone too, but there's another solar company. I can't think of the name of them now, but they're near the NYSEG offices. Jason, do you know what I'm talking about? Small company, but they're also producing solar modules.
The county has a solar farm out there in the Conklin, industrial park.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about a solar farm. I'm talking about a manufacturing business. I just can't think of the name of it. I'm sorry. I've written about it. I just can't come up with it at the moment.
Hey, and Jim, I'll tell you, when some of this stuff gets going, I definitely will write you a short. 500 words I could probably pull out in a couple of minutes.
Great.
Yeah.
Give you something, As we move forward, I'll definitely come up with something.
Okay, I just found it. It's called Suntegra. It's a solar shingle startup. So they're making roofing material that acts as small solar panels.
Cool.
Suntegra, Suntegra.
Yeah.
So that's another business that's within Broome County. And yes, Bluestone too, it ignited a lot of controversy. A lot of people have the wrong idea about wind turbines, that somehow they're going to hurt people's pacemakers and make property values nosedive and all that stuff. That stuff is way overblown. And when this gets done, it's the build out of this is going to be done at the end of this month. And then the next question is, when will NYSEG say, okay, can you actually start production? That could be another, few to several months, but that's close. And that's providing a lot of benefits to small villages and towns, as well as the county in terms of revenue. Yes, it got, some tax breaks, but most of that is mainly because there is no formula on how you value a wind farm. there's no agreed upon formula on how you assess those property values. So even if you wanted to, people say, oh, well, they're getting a big tax break. But even if you wanted to just somehow assess those properties, which there are many of them, you couldn't really legally easily do it. That it couldn't be challenged in court. So that's another reason why they have to get a payment in lieu of taxes agreement, which I didn't fully understand until I got involved in that. And that also, that's local, but it's tied in with, state level stuff and regulation as well. And that took a lot of the volunteer effort from our Susquehanna group members as well. So we're not ignoring the local stuff. We're being as practical as we can. And oh, by the way, one of the largest energy storage systems is going to be built by a company called Glide Path. It's called Oakdale Energy Storage. That's right on the hill of near the top of Robinson Hill Road. So if you're not aware of that, you might want to check that out too. We spent time and effort on reviewing that proposal as well. It's next to an existing fossil fuel pipeline, which is kind of unfortunate, but it turns out that the risk of that is almost nothing. So it's far enough away, even if the battery system catches fire, which has got its own monitoring system and extinguishing system, it's far enough separated from that pipeline, it's not going to be a problem. But that's all been reviewed by our members. So, and we've written articles about it. We've talked about this. So we're not ignoring the local stuff.
Good.
So anyway, I just wanted to let you know that we're,
I
and
appreciate
to
it.
our audience too, that, and people that might watch this in the future, that we're doing what we can with the level of volunteer effort that we can muster, and we will welcome additional help. Anybody that's out there watching this video in the future, if you like what we have been talking about and you care about saving a habitable climate and avoiding the worst horrors of what can become a horrific collapse of human civilization and, an extinction, mass extinction event that no human walking ever in the history of humanity has ever witnessed, please join us. Please help. Volunteer some time. So, and turn in your candidate statement to maybe become a member of our executive committee. We can really use help. We're doing what we can, and we're trying. So again, unless somebody has another comment, I'm going to close it there. Again, the positive news is we have the ability. We can save ourselves. We can save a habitable climate, have a healthier food system, healthier environment, less deaths, less disease, less dementia, and quieter streets, more jobs, better economy, people happier. So there's no reason not to do it. So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. There were some excellent thoughts and ideas, and I'm glad we did this. I was pulling my hair out because I couldn't come up with a presenter for this meeting, but I think this was a better use of our time, given the proximity to just a week ago having this election. I think this was perfect. So again, thank you everybody for participating.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thanks, Valdi.
All right, Scott, can you please stop the recording and make sure you save this, because I think we did have some nice comments, some excellent discussion.
Yeah, it's being stopped and saved.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.